awesome.
Awesome.
That was awesome.
You guys are awesome.
No,
You're awesome.
no.
You are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything is Awesome. I am your host, Kev, and this is the show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. And this week I've traded in the beer for coffee because this is an early morning interview that we have not done on this show before. And this week's guest, really excited to sit down and talk with. For those that have been listening to this show, you kind of know 2016 was a shitty year for me personally. You know, it was a year where my uncle was diagnosed with cancer, went into remission, it came back, and he lost his battle. And something that I realized during that year is how much Star Wars means to me. And in that year, I discovered a ton of great podcasts that helped me take my mind off of what was going on with my uncle in that year. And one of them, Jeff Stormer introduced me to, was Campaign Pod. And it was such a funny podcast that for an hour at a time, I could sit down and forget my troubles, but still kind of link myself to my uncle with very positive memories from sitting down and watching Star Wars with him as a kid. So I'm so grateful to have this week's guest on because I can personally thank him for making 2016 suck a little less. And so without further ado, the co-founder of the One Shot Podcast Network. He plays Bacta on Campaign Pod. Please welcome to the show, James D'Amato. James, normally I thank you for being on the show right now, but I'm going to thank you for making 2016 suck just a little less than it did.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm so glad that I could come on, especially since we helped you out. That's great.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that at this point, you guys kind of I'm not the first one to say, hey, you made my year suck a little or my day suck less. But as a fellow podcaster, I know that wasn't that's kind of a thing that's a bonus, I guess, to doing podcasting. When you guys set out to, I know you started with One Shot, when you started podcasting, was it ever an inclination that you may have people say, hey, you made my life better?
No, it's not something that I think any podcaster really sets out to do. It might be something that people set out to do on their fifth or eighth podcast that they produce. But a campaign for me, I believe, was my third podcast. So then we still had no idea how many people would be listening to the show and really any conception of how much you can touch people's lives by producing a podcast. So
it is something that, I'm in June, I'll be about 10 years into podcasting. And I want to say, actually, I went about it the reverse way where it was, I want to be that guy in the beginning of my podcasting career where I'm oh God, you made my life better. Oh God, here, take all the money because I'm a sponsor. And, as I've gone further into podcasting, it's slowly turned into well, that's not working. Let's just do it for me. And that's when it became the most rewarding. And then also you get not necessarily the money because it's podcasting, but you get the people that are just very grateful for your show for whatever reason it is.
Yeah, certainly to all the people out there dreaming of making their own podcast. I think if your primary motivator is money, you're likely to be disappointed. And that's not to say that podcasts can't make money. They certainly can. I'm very close to having podcasting be my primary source of income. But it took years of producing shows to make that happen. And much, much quicker comes a really creative fulfillment. And if you're not getting that out of podcasting, then I think you are missing probably the most beautiful thing about it.
Yeah, and it's nuts that it took me probably 8.5, 9 years to get to that point. And yeah, that's the advice I give everyone now. And usually, when I talk to other podcasters, this is the conversation we have is just, don't do it for money. Do it for find something that you love to talk about and do it for that because it's going to be way more fulfilling than trying to bust your ass to make money.
Absolutely.
So let's go to the beginning with you. Where are you from?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I was born in New York. I was raised most of my young life in Denver, Colorado, and I went to school in Pennsylvania. And right now, I live in Chicago, the podcast capital of the world.
Hey, I'm from Philly, and I think we would argue that.
What
We
do
have,
you have in Philly?
well, you know what,
Apart from yourself.
Jeff Stormer, I know he's the buddy of yours.
Yes, I do. I do love Jeff very much.
No, it's actually, Chicago is like one of the first cities that I did like hear a lot of like the big obviously like New York and LA have a lot of like the mainstream ones, but Chicago definitely has a lot of like what is, I guess, have become mainstream, but like to me they're still truly indie. And
Perhaps, but I mean, you have to keep in mind WBEZ is in Chicago. Uh, This American Life started in Chicago. And
That's
when you
true.
think of it, that's a podcast before podcasts.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I say that because I feel like Philly is like insanely strong for being nothing but indie podcasters. I think Overdue is like one of the most mainstream ones that we have in the area. But like just the podcasting community in general is something else I discovered. Like when I stopped looking at it from a money point of view, is like no matter where you're from, whether it's a local community like Philadelphia or Chicago, or just nationally or internationally, like everyone's super supportive of one another.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's too much advantage to being in a local podcast scene beyond it being slightly easier to record guest performances. And that's really, I don't know, for a given value of easy, because yes, I can have a lot of people on my show in person, which is really good for audio quality, but you also then have to convince somebody to leave their home, which I think is harder.
Yes.
But yeah, podcasting is such a great community. No matter where you live, I have found that most podcasters are friendly. They're willing to give so much of their time to help you make a really fun and interesting product. I love being a podcaster because I love connecting with podcasters all over the country, all over the world. It's just a super exciting medium to be a part of.
Yeah, and you're part of like two awesome communities, because it's the podcasting community, and then tabletop, specifically like tabletop RPGs, is another community that I discovered in the last like year and a half that is super like friendly and welcoming. And
Oh,
like,
sorry, my phone went up.
no problem. But yeah, the RPG community is just super friendly, and just like the podcast community, like very welcoming. I've always kind of had an interest in tabletop RPG. But it wasn't until probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where my friends finally were like, "Hey, we want to do this," and I was like, "Oh, finally! Like, I have a group of friends that want to meet to do this." And then I discovered like Too Cool for Tabletop, Jeff Stormer's Party of One podcast, Campaign, and the One Shot podcast, and all these great like just tabletop podcasts that remind me that they're as strong as the podcasting community in general.
Yeah, I feel truly fortunate to be a part of the gaming community at this time. I think the majority of gamers are such nice, friendly people, and very much like podcasting, there's sort of an even playing field. Even the big publishers are, manned and controlled by really accessible people. If you go to a gaming convention, you can talk to the it people of some of the most popular gaming franchises. Like, I think really the only exception is probably Wizards of the Coast and D&D, like that group of people. I guess in Fantasy Flight Games, like it's harder to have a conversation with those people, but you still can.
Yeah.
So it's this wonderful close-knit community to be a part of, and right now it is also a revolution for the industry in tabletop gaming. With the advent of crowdfunding, our publishing system finally works Before, tabletop just didn't have a publishing system that worked for it really at all. And the only games that could succeed were games that started with a pretty significant initial investment, which, for something that's analog and not likely to sell too many units, that just doesn't make sense. But thanks to Kickstarter, if you have an idea and people like that idea, you can just make it. You obviously have to be a little bit Kickstarter savvy and know how to promote something like that. But, there's no limitation. There's nobody who's standing at the industry with their arms crossed saying, no, you can't do this because I haven't approved your idea. All you need to be able to do is communicate your idea to other people, and then bam, you can make a product.
Yeah, I mean that's the Kickstarter. That I forget when that came on my radar. I think the first time it came on my radar was when Boss Monster, the dungeon building card game, was on there, and that was kind of like right around then. I feel was the boom of Kickstarter for game publishing because ever since then, like and not just like analog games, like even like indie, like video game publishers that want to put out like old school 8-bit art games, which I love because I'm a an old head when it comes to video games. All those game publishers are just finding so much success on Kickstarter, and it's great.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Kickstarter has just been a miracle for this industry. Again, it's the sort of thing where we were probably, except for the major publishers, as an industry, just on the verge of collapse. And this thing came up where all of a sudden you don't need to convince a bank or some other type of investor that your idea has merit. You just have to communicate directly with the people who are going to buy it. And then, bam, everything changed. We had all these small publishing houses that are now, like if you're part of the indie tabletop community, household names, people like Evil Hat. And I think even Pelgrane Press, who's doing quite well and was doing quite well before this publishing boom, they just exploded and became so much more successful.
And it just helps everybody. Like it doesn't like the success of one company doesn't mean it's a shame for another. Like it helps the whole gaming community from the player to the publisher.
Yes, it is very much a case of the rising tide raises all ships in our industry. And I think that lack of competition that, there's no, if someone doesn't buy my game, they're buying someone else's game mentality being absent has made it a friendlier community, has made it more accessible to people. I won't go ahead and say that gaming is super accessible to everybody. And I think, thankfully, most of the people that I work with in the industry are working on changing that. We want to broaden that playing field and get more people involved because it means a stronger industry.
Yeah. So where did your love of gaming come? Like, where did that origin story start?
So that for me started in college. I wasn't really much of an analog gamer. I played tons of video games, but I first got involved in role-playing in college because there was a big, nerdy analog gaming club at my school called Argo, the Allegheny Role-Playing and Gaming Organization.
Okay.
And they were hosting a beginner game on campus where they had a DM who was playing like a 1 to 20 campaign for people who had never played a role-playing game before. And it wasn't something that I would normally have been interested in, but there was a girl who was in this game who I was trying to get to know. And I figured joining a role-playing game would be a great way to do that. My buddy was part of the game and he wasn't having a great time with it. So I'm like, hey, dude, give me your spot so that I can get in the game and meet this person. And it ended up working out for me because not only did I get to know that person much better, I also ended up with a lifelong hobby that is slowly turning into a career. So I don't think a situation like that can work out better for somebody. But for all of those curious, yes, I am a fake geek boy who joined the hobby merely to get closer to the ladies.
That's such an interesting like outtake on it, because it's like it's rare. Mainstream media would never paint the light of join a geek RPG club to meet the girl. Like,
Well, I think that's because mainstream media is still being run by previous generations.
yes.
Folks who are left over from Gen X and the baby boomer generations are still in charge. So they won't approve a script where there is a diverse group of people playing games because they're still picturing, nerdy white kids in their basements, and that's not true anymore. Uh,
Yeah, and that's like my big
that's probably
issue with
never true.
oh yeah, and that's my issue with Big Bang Theory is like it depicts like that kind of nerd where it's just a bunch of white nerdy. Well, I mean, I guess it is a little diverse. There's Raj or whatever, but it doesn't paint the nerdom in its true light. Like, I think Community did a great job in showing
Yes.
what nerds are actually like.
Absolutely, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And there are some shows that depict D&D and role playing in a much more accurate way. But if you look at 90% of Let's Play D&D plots in television and movies, it is nerdy white kids, and more than that, the dungeon master is always an enormous jerk. Uh,
Yeah.
like as much as I love Dexter's Lab, and the Dexter's Lab D&D episode was like kind of a fun thing to have, it was still the dungeon master being like a maniacal jerk, and everybody in the party like sort of struggling through it. Like, you can't imagine how that would be fun. And I will say those depictions of role playing are something that kept me from it for a huge portion of my life, because I thought, I don't want to be a huge nerd. That's right. The person who played a bunch of video games and watched anime didn't want to be a nerd. But I also didn't want to play a game where, somebody was just a dick to you. That wasn't
Yeah.
fun.
Well, and I think Stranger Things, not that that was the focus of the show, but like that first episode kind of, I think, depicted it really well. Like, that was like a perfect introduction to the mainstream audience of this is what D&D actually is, especially in like the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many articles I see anytime D&D is depicted anyway. This was like really prevalent with Community, and really good for freaks and geeks, and now especially with Stranger Things, where we read the think piece that's like, D&D is the real winner from this successful media franchise. But I gotta say, man, oh man, was the depiction of Dungeons and Dragons in Stranger Things so good. I'm excited for the next season because I want to see where they'll take it.
Yeah, when Stranger Things came out, I was interviewing some people out in LA about Once Upon a Time or something, and they asked me, we started talking about what we were watching, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm watching The Flash right now, like, that's my jam right now. And they're like, have you been watching Stranger Things? I'm like, what? No, that looks like a silly show. And they said, no, you have to sit down and watch it. And it took me, I think it was out for like a month and a half before I sat down and like started binging it. And right from like the intro of that show is what grabbed me, and I was hooked, and I'm right there with you. Cannot wait for season 2. Love all like the promotional stuff that they put out for it already.
Yeah, exactly. I love that they're probably fighting a Thessal Hydra. It's awesome.
It is such a good time to be a geek. I think, like, as much as like old media is still running a lot of things, like the Netflix and the new media outlets that we have, I think really kind of get it, and they like, I mean, and to see how far like D&D has really come is like there's so many like mainstream celebrities that drop it, like randomly will say something about me and my D&D club or whatever, and I think that's so neat that like we're finally like our generation is finally like the it crowd on TV, and like they have no problem talking about playing D&D, Magic, or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I really do like the destigmatizing of some of those hobbies. I mean, video games are now, whether the baby boomer generation wants to admit it or not, video games are the primary mass culture. Like the video game industry is bigger than movies.
Yeah.
So somebody's interests in gaming in one way or another, I think we're past the point where it makes you other to have that interest. And I'm excited for the kids who get to grow up in that environment.
Oh, I can't wait until I have two children. I have a 5-year-old son and a she'll be 3, my daughter in May. I can't wait. Like he's old enough to like sit down and start playing some video games with. I can't wait till he's old enough for me to sit down and do tabletop with.
Yeah.
And I've actually like seeked out there was one on Kickstarter. I forgot what it was. But there were like a kid friendly tabletop RPG game.
And that would be No Thank You Evil.
Oh yeah, yep.
By Monte Cook Games.
There you go. Yeah. And I looked at it and I was like, you know what? My kid just does not have the attention span to sit down and do this. So in a couple of years, I feel like I'm going to be able to do it. But that's like, I love being able to share my nerdum with my kids and make sure that they grow up right, not like in the Star Wars prequels, and making sure that they know what's what. And yeah, it's just like the next generation is going to, as far as this kind of stuff is concerned, plenty of other real life problems to worry about, but this won't be one of them. This will be something that's just openly accepted now.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the sort of thing where you're worried about before, like, do I want to pass on this hobby because it could be tough for them growing up, with the stigma, but it's not there now, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, and this is, God, I haven't used this reference in forever, but, when Force Awakens came out, I saw a commercial of a kid who built an R2-D2 unit to ask a girl out to go see the Star Wars movie. And I saw that, I was like, that kid, like, that was me in high school, but I would have been thrown into a locker. Like, there's no way what world are we living in now? That's when I really knew that, like, geeks took over the world. Like, we rule it now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty rad.
Yeah. All right. So college is where your D&D / tabletop RPG kind of kicked off. Mm-hmm. What transitioned that into like a podcast? Like what got you into podcasting, and what made you choose tabletop? Maybe One Shot wasn't your first podcast. Maybe I'm preempting the question here. Let's start with podcasting.
So podcasting I got into because my buddy Alex Manich was a fan of the Improv for Humans podcast on Earwolf. And we were, at the time, going through the Second City Conservatory. And shortly before our graduation, Alex showed me this podcast, and I just loved it. And not only did I love that podcast, I love the medium of podcasting in general. And it wasn't too long after we started listening to the show that we decided, hey, we've got all the comedy skills. All we really need is a microphone, and then we can do our own podcast. So Alex and I had sort of gone back and forth and talked about it. So I just, went in for it, and I spent $150 on a USB microphone and decided to start the show. So we started doing a show called The Overshare, which was really essentially just a ripoff of Improv for Humans. And we did that for about a year, and we did it pretty seriously. There were very few weeks where we missed an episode. We had this commitment for the first 2 years when we were doing incredibly seriously that we would not record an episode unless there was a female performer present, because we're we're in Chicago comedy. It's not just lazy, but irresponsible of us to air something without a lady performer. And I think that only really dropped off in the third year that we were doing it, when I was doing one shot, and it became too much for me to be part of the booking. And so Alex was just trying to keep his head above water with all the other things that he was doing. But like we were very seriously doing it. Because we were seriously doing it, we hooked up with our friend, Patrick O'Rourke, who at the time ran a media company called Peaches and Hot Sauce, where they were producing a lot of podcast and video projects. And about, I want to say 6 months into our relationship with Pat, he came to me and was like, hey, I like this other show on the Earwolf Network called Nerd Poker. And I know, and for those who don't know, Nerd Poker is Brian Posehn's D&D podcast that he does with some of his comedian friends. He's like, I like this show. I know that you're into tabletop gaming. Could you develop something like this for Peaches and Hot Sauce? So I listened to Nerd Poker, and it was another thing where, man, I really like this show. And I listened to the other actual play podcasts that were out there, and I noticed there was a bit of a gap, because everything I was listening to, they're either playing Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. And 90% of the time when they were doing a Pathfinder game, they were playing through Rise of the Rune Lords. So I looked at this and I was like, there's really something here, because it's super enjoyable to listen to people play this game. And I've always wanted to find a way to export the joy that I get from role playing, and recording it and distributing it seems like the ticket. So I was like, this industry is wonderful. There's such a diverse amount of games and genres of games out there. Let's create a show where we can show that off. So the premise of One Shot is just that I would do a different game system every recording session. We'd record something, we'd break it down into hour-long episodes and distribute it, and just about every month we'd have a new game with a new cast of players. And I brought in my best friend, Kat Cool, who sort of helped me build the format for the show, and she was part of the first few episodes, and she went on to produce Campaign. I brought her in to do it, and because of that and so many other factors, because it struck like a little bit of a unique nerve at the time. Like now, our concept is not as unique as it was when we started doing it. But because of all of that, like so many different factors, One Shot turned out to be a success. And it grew very, very quickly, and we, from there, sort of turned it into this thing that's becoming a profession for us. I don't know that we could do that again now, but we were certainly very lucky that we started doing it when we started doing it. And I think we were pretty smart to choose the format that we ended up choosing. But yeah, that's essentially how I got into it.
Yeah, I love ironically, I didn't get into, like, I just started binging One Shot because I as a podcast, I don't know if you have this problem, but I have this problem where I have so much content that I want to listen to on top of what I'm creating. So, I have, like, when I finally, like, I would say I started Campaign, I think I looked back at my records, and it was around June, of 2016, right before my uncle went into remission. I started listening to it. And then when it came back, I started listening to it hard and binging it every day. So, like, I say an hour at a time. You guys helped me. It really was like, I would listen to it pretty much every free moment that I had, because I had so many backlog episodes to listen to. So now that I'm finally, like, catching up on that, I'm like, all right, now that I am out of Campaign binging, I'm starting to binge One Shot. But it is, I was introduced to a One Shot format through Jeff, actually, because he does that 2-player One Shot kind of deal. And he turned me on to you guys. Too Cool for Tabletop is another one that started out as a One Shot podcast. And I really like it is funny that it's not necessarily a unique thing anymore. Last year to me, I was like, this is the most unique entertainment I've ever heard. And now that like I see what's out there, it's not, but it is like you guys seemingly look like you kind of started that one shot idea. And it's great that you guys hit it when you had to. Hey there, super friends. It's Kev. I'm just going to interrupt this show for a minute or two so I can do some housekeeping. If you want to help support this show, you can do it in several different ways. One of those ways, I'll read your name on air right here, not just your name, but your whole review, by leaving a 5-star review, or any review, really. I'll read all of them. But hopefully you're kind enough to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. Just go to our iTunes page, subscribe to the page, that way you don't miss an episode, and of course leave that 5-star text review. iTunes Math does a lot of good things that make more people listen to the show, and that means more cool things happen to Everything Is Awesome. Another way that you can support is word of mouth recommendations. Just tell friends to listen to Everything Is Awesome. Put it on when you're carpooling together on your way to work or on your way to Comic-Con or whatever. And the final way, this one may cost you a little bit of money, but that's okay. If you go to patreon.com/thatentertains, the other ways you help support us are just as good, free for nothing, help us. But this one, if you pledge some money to us, we'll give you some more stuff in return. You know, and by we, I mean Jason Ashley from Too Cool for Tabletop and I, we like to say $12 a year, bro. $1 a month is really nothing to you. You skip anything for one day, and that's more than $1. And that helps make our dreams come true, really, if I'm going to be honest. That's entertainment, which is what funds this podcast, is running a Patreon, patreon.com/thatentertains. And I mean, really, honestly, if we could hit $25 a month of support, that would be wonderful. It means bills are covered for us, and that's really all I want at the end of the day. And everything else is just icing on the cake. It means we get to do more upgrades, it means we get to create more content, and a lot of the stuff that we want to do is at least early access for you guys that pledge to us on patreon.com/thatentertains, or we'll even do some exclusive content. We're working on some things now that we're thinking of for exclusive content that we'll do randomly throughout the year and whatnot. So again, if you want to help support this podcast, go to patreon.com/thatentertains. Not just supporting this podcast, but you're supporting That's Entertainment, which means that even more content besides this podcast will come at you. We're talking skits, sketches, web series, movies, a whole ton of content that we have that we want to do that will eventually get done anyway, but with your help we can get it done sooner. If you don't want to spend any cash, I completely get it. I understand it. iTunes reviews help us tremendously, as well as word of mouth recommendations. Finally, you can also go to the contact page on awesomepodcast.com and subscribe to our newsletter. We're going to start sending out weekly reminders of the things that we've posted throughout the week, as well as spotlights on the guests that we've had on our podcasts. And we're also going to be sending out reminders or notifications about new things that we're working on, events that we're going to be doing and whatnot. So just another place to get some more detailed information. We're going to try to make it unique enough for you so that it's worth us invading your inbox. This has been more than a minute or two. So let's get back to the conversation. Makes it harder for me when I want to go. Like, literally, we sat down, me and my buddies, and we said, let's create something. And this was like probably right before I started listening to Campaign. I was like, let's sit down and like, let's record our D&D sessions. Like, why not? It's fun, and we'll just throw it out there, see what happens. And then I started listening to Campaign. I was like, well, what's the point when we're not that funny? Like,
well, I don't think I don't want to discourage anybody from getting involved. Because again, you never know. I don't know that because I started this because I was trying to develop a show that was like Brian Posehn's show.
Yeah.
There's that is a huge shout out to start it, to be like, oh yeah, fantastically talented comedian and actor Brian Posehn. Let's do something like he's doing. And I don't think that you could have told me that, like, yeah, in a couple of years' time, you will be one of the top names in this space. And like it's not like we're the biggest. I mean, Fear the Boot is still like I think one of the biggest names in the tabletop game, and now the Adventure Zone has entered the scene as well. So you've got the McElroy family, the massive podcasting monolith, also part of this space. But like we're doing quite well for ourselves, and I don't think that should discourage anybody from starting their own. Because who knows? You could just strike a nerve and you could be one of the it podcasts in a couple of years. But also, that's not a great reason to start doing it.
Yeah, it is a weird thing, and like I say, I mean, obviously you guys are very funny, and it made us rethink it made me rethink how I want to eventually launch it, and it kind of actually helped me reform the whole idea of how we're running our little measly entertainment company, and how we're going to launch it down in the future, which is like, it's. What is it like? I'm sure, aside from people saying, "Oh, you make my life better," like I did in the beginning of the episode, I'm sure there's cats out there that have said like, "Hey, you guys inspire me to do blah 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 blah." Like, has that happened, and what's that like?
Oh yeah, I mean, Jeff Stormer is a great case. I actually he posted, I think after doing the podcast for a year or 2 years, I think it's probably just 1 year. He made a post about how he had sent us an email that he had deleted, but it was the thing that inspired him to start his show. And I saved everything, so I had that email that I searched through my archives and sent to him. So, like, Jeff had contacted me because, our format of trying out new games and showing them off had inspired him to do Party of One. And there's so many other wonderful podcasts. The Redemption podcast, which is a Star Wars actual play, was inspired by Campaign, or at least had some inspiration drawn from Campaign. And my friend Pranks Paul, who is a lawyer, and I think otherwise would not have gotten into podcasting, is now managing Never Tell Me the Pods, which I am sort of a co-host on, except the show. All the show really needs is pranks to be a show. But I don't think he would be podcasting if we weren't like. She's a Super Geek, which is one of my favorite tabletop podcasts that focuses on female GMs. That podcast started because they were inspired by One Shot. So it's really cool to see all of the creativity that has sprung out of what we did. That's what I love about podcasting is it's a sort of thing where you can hear something and love something and then decide, oh, the barrier between me loving this thing and me doing this thing is basically non-existent. Like, you do need enough money to purchase a microphone, but if you're doing it with a couple other people, like, you can pool your resources on that and you can start producing right away.
Yeah, and it's there's two mindsets when it comes to podcasting too. There's the people that are like, well, that already exists, why do it? Like that's Reddit. That is if you go to the Reddit podcasting communities, that's their mindset. And then there's other people, and I'm one of these, is like, why not? Like, do it. And it doesn't even have to sound like, it has to sound decent enough, but like I'm a huge supporter of that if it's just good content, if the content's good, then a lot of people will forgive your learning mistakes, your growing pains as you get into podcasting. And much like, I mean, Kevin Smith says it all the time when he's doing his million podcasts, like, go out there and everyone has a story. Everyone should do a podcast. And like, I'm right there with it. Like, there's no reason that you can't start a podcast because everyone has something interesting to say, or you love something with enough passion that you can turn that into a podcast. And I mean, if someone says, well, that already exists, don't do it. I mean, for instance, if someone said that to you, maybe One Shot wouldn't exist because,
they would have pointed out the other like obscure RPG show that like started a month before us that also had our concept. Yeah, I think most of the people who will advise you away from doing something that already exists are people who are producing their third or fifth podcast, where that idea wouldn't make sense for them to invest their time into because they already understand how everything works and they are now trying to produce podcasts to specifically build an audience. And if your big goal is to be super marketable, be able to build a gigantic audience, and start a new podcasting, like an industry-focused podcast, then yeah, you probably don't want to do an idea that's already out there because, like it was with our show, it's going to be easier for a show with a little bit of a more unique voice to take off. But I think that's terrible advice to a new podcaster. For a new podcaster, you have to do what you care about. And then when you're doing your second, your third, your fourth podcast, that's when you can sort of take the temperature of the industry and launch something that is designed to be unique and add a bunch of people to it. Never let anyone stop you.
Yeah, and me, I just do the same thing as a new podcaster on my 13th podcast. I'm like, you know what the world needs? Another interview show. But I'm again like it's. I think because because if you go into it like the way a seasoned podcaster might do it, I think if you're a creative person, you're gonna eventually get to the point that says, I don't. You know what? I just want to do it for me now. And I think that's, like I said, I mean, I would venture to say that the audience of this show is probably the average size of the audience I've ever had. I've had bigger audiences when I really was gung-ho about whatever I was doing at the time. But this is the most rewarding because it's more rewarding creatively. And I think that's, I think that's the most important thing when it comes to the podcasting medium, because as we mentioned, it's a medium that is literally a second job. It's and you don't get paid for it. I probably put up close to 30 hours a week into podcasting on top of my day job. So it's insane the amount of work that you're going to put into it. But if you do it for love versus money, it's so rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel exactly the same way. I probably put about 40 hours a week into one shot and related projects. And thankfully, I have been able to cut my day job down to part-time. But, if you step back and look at it, that's still like a 70-hour week that I am putting in, which is way too much work. So it's something that you have to be passionate about. And if you're not excited about it, if you're not passionate about it, it is not a project that works for you.
And speaking of one shot and related projects, I do want to get into, NPC and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this Paracosm Press.
Yes.
Okay. So how did that develop?
I think pretty shortly after I started doing one shot, one of the things that I realized about the gaming industry is there's also really no barrier to entry for producing a game. A game does not mean a published volume that's over 300 pages with glossy color photos and a hardback book around it. A game is something as simple as Everyone is John, which is really just a couple paragraphs written out and distributed on the internet. So I wanted to make my own game. And Kat felt the same way. So we started working on a game project that is currently on hiatus because we're too busy with all of our other 1,000 projects. And I think the publishing company went through a couple iterations. For a while, we were 10 Penny Press, and then we found another 10 Penny Press operating somewhere. So we shifted over to Paracosm Press, a name that is so foreign to people and unpronounceable and hard to spell that it's probably not the best name, but meaning-wise, it's great because a paracosm is a very detailed and vivid fictional universe. So it fits what we care about quite well, but we were working on this other game, and we were, facing a lot of design issues, and we were still, weren't wondering how are we going to do this Kickstarter. When I did an interview with Kat where we went on this variety show in Chicago called Geek Show, and the host brought out this game called Utter Nonsense, which is another Chicago-born party game. And the point of the game is to do different accents. And you read these phrase cards and those accents, and it's just a lot of fun as a party game. But I found that the jokes were like more on the Cards Against Humanity scale of humor. So like there were a lot of funny things, and speaking in accents, whether they're good or bad, is always funny. Like it's just fun to perform like that with people. But the cards just had a ton of shock humor, and Kat and I came away from that being like, man, we really like this game concept, and this game concept is so useful for gaming because there are so many people who don't feel comfortable using voices at the table, and for us, using character voices is just one of the most fun things in the world. So we wanted to take that and make it easier for and more familiar and useful to gamers, and at the same time, take humor and make it our own. Take that concept and make it something that like isn't going to ostracize people of a certain race, people of a certain ethnicity or culture, and instead just make it about games and make all those jokes about gaming. So we, over the course of a couple months, not a couple months, a couple weeks.
Oh wow!
We put together noisy person cards. We put together a 150 card like proof of concept set that we brought to a convention called Metatopia, which is a playtesting convention that happens in Morristown, New Jersey every year.
Yes.
So we took this concept to Morristown and showed it off to people, and they loved it. Like it was just so successful. Like the first round, we had everybody who said that they were going to do the playtest came and did the playtest, and they had fun. But the second round of playtesting, we had twice as many people as had signed up. And we were in this like large ballroom. We had a table of like 10 people who were roaring with laughter at each performance. Every person's like read of the cards, and it sort of drowned out all the other tables in the room. And like Kat and I knew, like, man, we got a hit on our hands. So we worked very quickly after that to develop the rest of the game, and we threw that up on Kickstarter. Primarily because like we wanted to learn how Kickstarter works, because we had seen a lot of Kickstarters, we'd helped a lot of people with Kickstarters, but we had never run one ourselves. So I'd say just now we are sort of exiting the Kickstarter process. We have finally started international shipping, which is really the last step that we had in our Kickstarter journey with Noisy Person cards. And so now it's time to breathe a sigh of relief and really start sinking into our other projects.
Now, does NPC, does that end, like, is it end with Kickstarter, or is it available at game and hobby shops?
It's something that I would love to be able to talk about, but I cannot currently. But people will see news about it in the next couple of months, I think.
Well, that sounds great, and so more projects coming from you guys as far as games are concerned. That's exciting. Are you going back to that one that you were talking about earlier that hit a railroad, or is it going to be something new?
It's going to be something that comes out before that, I think. What we are working on for our next project is a board game aimed at younger kids, and for that I'm talking about like the 6 to 10 age bracket, maybe 6 to 12 if we're lucky. That sort of bridges the gap between role playing and and board games. So we kind of want to introduce role-playing concepts that will make role-playing games less foreign to kids as they grow up. And, just make a more fun game for the family on that. And I think we're trying to have something ready for the next Metatopia, but it's a matter of, Kat and I being able to get together and work on it.
That is a project that it perked my ears, and I will be looking out for intently as I try to get my kid into RPG. So another interesting, I don't do any research on my guests. It's one of the things my audience knows. I like to have a more natural conversation, something that might happen if we're having a beer at a bar or something. But because, I follow you guys somewhat regularly with Campaign and now One Shot and whatnot, obviously I know some things. And one thing that I came across that I thought was interesting, and I didn't pin it, and I should have, because you work with comedians on your podcast and whatnot, but that you actually, and you mentioned it earlier in the interview, that you wanted to be a comedian and are a paid comedian now for, what you do on your podcast network and whatnot. So where does your comedy or being a comedian, do you do that at all with all these other projects? Do you go and do stand-up or improv or whatever?
So for me, that's what these projects are.
Okay.
Like One Shot is primarily a comedy thing. I mean, right now the series that we're putting out is more dramatic, but 90% of the episodes that are on One Shot are comedy games. It's just, I really love comedy. I love performing. I love making people laugh. The thing that I don't really love is the theater system, whether you are a stand-up or an improviser or really whatever format you present your comedy in. Most of the time, you are not really in control of that product. Like, you don't control when you get to go on stage. You don't control what the environment is like, who's watching, which audience you're playing to. And we have a system now that really only benefits the owners of those theaters. And I'd argue in most cases, even they don't benefit that much from the way they run things. While I love the theaters in Chicago, and I owe a lot to them because of the skills they helped me develop, I don't think they are worth my time right now. I think it's a lot more exploitative than I feel comfortable with as a performer. And I am much more comfortable doing something that is relevant to a hobby that I am very passionate about and helping to provide a platform to other performers so that they can build an audience.
Well, and I mean, that kind of just goes back to what we've said about podcasting throughout the episode is doing it in a way where you have your passion and it doesn't get old or it doesn't feel like work or whatever. And that's an interesting thought, because I am someone, I'm 32, I'll be 33 this year. And I've had this interest in improv for years where I don't know why. And I was like last year I was going to go take a class, and this year I think it's finally going to happen. And I've sat down with buddies of mine that are comedians, and they're like, why would you want to do improv? Why would, and I guess there's a whole stand-up versus improv thing.
I mean, there is for the stand-ups. I think stand-up comedy is I was a stand-up in high school and through college, and it's a medium that I really respect. It's something that's very personally driven, and I talked about not being in control of about what you can do. Stand-up, you have full artistic control of the show. It's all material coming from you that you're performing. Which is great, but you have no control really over the stage system, and the open mic system is ludicrous and awful. I really respect stand-up comics, but I think because stand-up is so difficult, because the theater system there is very predatory, because it's an intensely competitive world. It does in stand-up, someone else's success does mean less success for you. Because of that, they tell themselves stories about why what they're doing is the most proper thing. So it leads to a lot of, improv isn't real comedy, because it's like, whose line is it anyway? And like jokey cruise ship improv, which, I mean, I don't really want to knock those forms of improv either, because like, hey, if it makes people laugh, it's comedy.
Yeah.
But they've also never seen Chicago long form improv. That is real art there. I can't say that you could make a qualitative assessment of stand up versus improv. And if you are, you're only saying that because you feel deeply insecure at the core of your being.
Well, and for me, what it comes down to, like when I think about like what do I want to do, like now, like, and it's at this point it's more kind of like this would be fun to try out, like why not? Like it goes back to the whole why not thing, and but the one thing I'm like grew up as a super shy kid, like not your typical like goofball or anything, but like I like to make jokes, I like to write funny things down and whatnot, but when the idea of stand-up comedy on my own versus doing improv with whether it's just a buddy improv system or with a whole group, like I feel way more comfortable being on stage with a group of people than just myself. But there would be a lot less sweat coming from my body, I'm sure, and that's like where I'm at with it. Like I've been trying to get improvers on this show to talk about, and like the two that I booked before like backed out at the last minute. I'm like, God damn it, I just want to sit down and talk improv. And it is something that like this year I'm going to try to make happen big time. Just like not only like so we do our podcast, Everything Is Awesome. We do it live. Every once in a while we try to do like a late night talk show format. And, that's when the moment that developed, which was for the Philadelphia Podcast Festival last year, I was like, what would make a whole lot of sense is taking an improv class. Cause like, that's all this is like me doing improv on the mic. So like, let me hone my skills, or let me get skills, cause I'm not that funny. So let me sit down and like learn how to hone being funny and whatnot through improv and go from there. And that's like kind of where I'm at with it. Like improv is just a huge interest of mine.
Yeah, I think improv is great. And I think it's something that almost anyone can benefit from trying out. I was just talking about how I don't like the predatory theater system. Whether like that aside, I think if you or somebody who has been considering improv either as a skill to pick up for a career path or as something that you've always wanted to try, you should definitely go out and take a class. The theater system really doesn't enter into the picture of just picking up the skills. And I think improv is just a wonderful thing. It really helped me a great deal. Like I don't think the shows that I'm doing now would be nearly as entertaining as they are without my background in improv.
And I mean, and I think you mentioned it earlier. I mean, that's kind of what role playing is. Like, yes. At the end of the day, it's just improv. And it's something that like my buddy who runs the game, I was like, we should really like go and like, I know everyone else doesn't have this huge interest in improv, or like no one else really wants to turn this into a podcast, but like you have that mindset. Like, why not? Let's go together. And hell, if it works out and we take more and more classes and we just really hone our skills, we can do our own little like improv team. It would be great. And that's what I'm really working on. I'm trying to twist his arm to go. He's just something about money or whatever. I'm like, come on, dude, once in a lifetime opportunity. But yeah, it's I do, before we go, because we're getting near the end of our hour here, I just, once again, I have to thank you and Kat and everyone that's part of Campaign and the One Shot Podcast Network, because it's not, aside from last year, just in general, I'm going over for an article I'm writing, the top 10 podcasts that I listen to, and like, when I really broke it down and thought about it, like, right now it's Campaign specific because that's what I've listened to for the last year, but like you guys have really like got something special there. It's just super funny and super entertaining. And, for me, I have an emotional connection to it. So it's just, thank you for putting it out there. It's just so good.
Oh, thank you so much. That really means a lot to hear that, we have helped somebody. I know podcasts are that way for me. It's so easy as a podcast listener to develop such an intimate relationship with the person that you're listening to. Because, I mean, if you're me and you listen to multiple shows a day, you spend more time listening to podcasts than you do talking to some members of your family.
Yup.
Which like that is such a powerful thing about the medium. So thank you so much for listening. Seriously, it means a lot that people out there are drawing value from what I do. It's very hard to do these things sometimes, and it means so much to hear from people who are really affected by all the work that I put in for it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, you can tell the amount of work that goes into it. And maybe as a podcaster, I know it a little bit better too, but like you can definitely hear it. All the work that's put into campaign, all the work that's put into One Shot that I've been starting to binge that, like I said, and just seeing what you guys talk about on the net and NPC and everything, all these little projects that you and One Shot are doing. I can see how much work, and luckily right now it sounds like it still feels like passion for you. So, it doesn't sound like you're throwing the towel anytime yet. And if you do, just call me, email me so I can tell you, hey man, you stopped me from crying today. All right, before we let you go, throw out some plugs where people can find you.
Absolutely. If you want to find me and talk to me, you can find me on Twitter. That's the best place. I am at OneShotRPG, all one word. If you want to find my shows and listen to them, please head over to oneshotpodcast.com. There you'll be able to find One Shot, our flagship series where we try out different role-playing games with rotating casts of players. Campaign, our ongoing Star Wars Edge of the Empire podcast with a consistent cast of some of the funniest people that I've ever met in my life. You can find our interview programs like Backstory, Modifier, and Talking Tabletop. If you're somebody who's really passionate about gaming and you want to learn more about the industry, listening to those shows is a great way to meet some of the personalities involved. And if you like live streaming and videos, please check out our Twitch page at twitch.tv/OneShotRPG. We are hosting an event on February the 26th. I have no idea when this podcast is going up. It might be after the fact. But we are hosting an event called the Dungeon Dome, which is a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition gladiator match that we're sort of doing in a wrestling style. So we have some over-the-top heroes who are going to be entering an arena in teams of 2 and battling it out to the death save for the entertainment of a live audience. That is going up on February 26th at 12 p.m. If you are not able to join us for the live performance, that is going to be archived on our Twitch page and then exported to YouTube. So you will definitely have a chance to check it out.
Yeah, I will be sure, because this is going out after that, but I will be sure that my audience knows about it ahead of time. I'll tweet about it and whatnot. That sounds like so much fun. I'm gonna pray to God I can hop in and not have to deal with my kids going to bed to watch that.
Well, yeah, it'll be like 12 p.m. Central Time, probably till 5. So there'll be at least part of it you'll be able to catch.
I'll just have to sneak away from what's the 26th? Is that a
Sunday?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could sneak away. Perfect. All right. Once again, James, thank you for being on Everything is Awesome. You can find me on Twitter at ThatNerdyKev. You can find this show on Twitter at RealAwesomePod. And of course, we're on the Core Temp Arts podcast network. Check them out at coretemparts.com. For Everything is Awesome, I'm Kev. We've been awesome right here on awesomepodcast.com.
Everything is Awesome is part of Core Temp Arts, a podcast network featuring pop culture, TV, movie, and geek podcasts. Check out some of our other shows, like TV Ate My Brain, Let's Chat with Revel and Friends, and Podstalgic at coretemparts.com.